in the next couple of minutes, I will try to describe a bit the development from this scenario story, in fact, to the 4 subprojects we will present to you today. So the major step after having read or written this scenario story was that we established a strategy workshop with also participants and stakeholders along the leather supply chains. And in this strategy workshop, we focused for the beginning on this scenario story and try to extract the 4 key questions that in fact needed to be answered in order to reach this scenario that is described in the story. And from these 4 questions, so to say research questions on, we then developed one roadmap for each question. And this roadmap can be seen as a sort of guideline that states exactly milestones, but also concrete actions, tasks that need to be taken in order to answer this question. The roadmaps are divided into 3 phases. One that is a short-term phase, and which leads to 2022, which is in fact the duration of this project. The second phase is a mid-term phase, which is until 2027. And the long-term phase is until the actual setting of the scenario story, which is 2035. These roadmaps were firstly created in the workshop itself, live in a one-day workshop. And after that, the 4 roadmaps were elaborated by the project core team, digitalized, and then sent back to the participants of the workshop in order to gain new insights, feedback, and a review process. Next slide, please. And the interesting part about that was that already in the workshop, but also in the elaboration phase, we could derive direct implementation projects out of these roadmaps, which we then formed into fact sheets and developed a bit further in the project core team. But I will come back to this issue in a couple of minutes. Let me focus again on the roadmaps itself, because the roadmap together with the scenario story you were just hearing about from Julian, they together build the cornerstones of the conceptual framework in which the 4 subprojects you are hearing about today are in fact implemented. And this conceptual framework can be seen in what we designed as a theory of change. Next slide, please. Thanks. Because the theory of change is a methodology that tries to give guidance for the process of system change. Because if you want to change a complex system, it is very difficult. In fact, it's impossible to change the system directly with simple measurements. The process is rather that you actually produce an output, and this output has an effect on a consequent outcome. And this is also the basis assumption of the theory of change. To explain this very abstract concept in more detail, I will describe this image, what you see here in front of you, in a bit more detail, starting in fact from the future state and coming back to today. So I start on the right side of this image and work my way to the left side. So the overall goal of this project, in fact, the impact we are trying to achieve, can be quite well understood in the scenario story that was just described. But in order for this scenario to actually happen, we need certain outcomes, which you see in outcome level 2. For example, we definitely need law enforcement to take place. If we're talking about changed supply chains, we are also talking about a kind of cultural change in this field. And after all, we are talking about consumer products at the end that are being sold. So these products need to be more sustainable. And if we're talking about selling, we're also talking about changed consumption patterns. And again, these outcomes do not happen right away. They also have a first impact that actually leads to this outcome, which you find in outcome level 1. For example, for law enforcement to take place, first thing you need is a normative impulse that actually creates regulations and norms. And the same applies to a cultural change. This can only be the result of new corporations and new business models, process innovations, and many more. And the same applies, of course, to sustainable products. They are the results of new development processes and also different sourcing behavior. So the interesting part here is, in fact, that the project we are presenting to you today doesn't aim at directly having that impact on the overall system, but merely setting the impulses for critical elements in this system. And this is what is described on the very left side of this visualization, the outputs. Because the 4 subjects, and it is also possible that in the progress of this project, there will be some subprojects added. These subprojects should create an output that have an impact on the different outcomes, which then in turn, in the long term, have an impact that is described in the scenario process. So that is a bit the conceptual framework. I'm sure it is quite complex to understand. So the very more detailed version of this you can find also on our website as a download link or directly on the website itself. Next slide, please. So having established this conceptual framework, the other interesting question is, how did we now come up with these 4 subprojects we are presenting you today? Why is it 4 and not 3 or 5? And why exactly these subprojects? And here I want to refer to the fact sheets I was just talking about and the roadmaps, because we could extract from the roadmap and the strategy workshop itself a big number of implementation projects, drafts, concepts, ideas that were the starting point for us. And these projects were then elaborated in our core project team, combined and developed further until a point where we could write an abstract with a title about this subproject that we all added onto one sheet and send again back to the participants of this workshop in order to gain a review and feedback concerning these projects. We were sending them 12 different projects, but at the same time also the possibility to add other proposals for projects. And interestingly to note here is that they were asked to rate on 2 different scales. One was the level of impact this project might have on the whole system, which was created on a scale between 1 and 5. And the second question was, not less important, would you be interested to participate in these projects? We then received a lot of feedback, quantitatively, but also qualitatively, that helped us to get a better view onto these different projects. Then we combined different projects that had overlapping contexts and also developed some projects further until we reduced the total number of projects to the 4 subprojects that you are seeing and hearing about today. So this is the process, how we actually came to these 4 subprojects. And now I will tell you what exactly is the concept of a subproject and the mode of work in it. Next slide, please. So first of all, what exactly is a subproject in our understanding? Let me emphasize that the maybe most important idea here is that it is in fact a draft idea. Although you are hearing today a presentation with a lot of slides, and maybe you have seen our website with downloadable PDF files where you have a quite precise image of the subproject, it is still a draft. It is open-ended work. And in context with different stakeholders talking about these subprojects, in many cases we heard the word pioneering work. And in some parts we are also trying to do that. And if you are trying to work out pioneering work, you have to have an open-minded attitude, a mindset that leads space to change the whole subject. And this is what we're trying to emphasize here. So if you participate in this subprojects, you are welcome to change the scope, to have an impact and on the design of the project itself. So not only work in the project. The second aspect is who is allowed or invited to participate here. The projects are open to every person and organization who is interested in it. And this includes also, of course, a big number of personnel resources of the university itself that is able to support the work. And this includes a big number of different departments, including their respectively infrastructure. And depending on the subproject itself, we have different kinds of preparatory work available that helps us getting started and is a precise basis for the work in the subproject. And the project duration is until 2022, as you heard in the beginning of this presentation, but we are pursuing a follow-up funding of the subprojects. And it is also worth mentioning that the concept of the subprojects does include business models. They should work on their own. In fact, we are trying to create topics and projects that actually are so sustainable, so viable that they can actually stand on their own feet once they are established. Next slide, please. So the last and maybe most important question for you is, what is in fact the working mode in a subproject? First of all, we are always talking about a tandem. We're trying to link science with practice. And this means that representatives from Darmstadt University of Applied Science work together with representatives from practice. And this cooperation process will be done mostly through workshops and meetings. And as you see at this time, and especially when we're talking about international teams, most of it will be online meetings. And as this is a scientific research project in a way, of course, we have a big number of scientific methods that we can use, including empirical studies. And as you have heard from my colleague in the very beginning of the speech, we have, for example, a so-called citizens panel with more than 1,000 registered participants that we can use as a survey for different aspects of these subprojects. And last but not least, of course, the subprojects are very different, and most likely the participants in it will also be very different. Therefore, details of the working mode is, of course, subject to internal agreement. And with this, I give back to Karen. Thank you very much.